The beginning.
By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was done, he commanded, and it stood fast.
I am an architect. I imagine designs that would be visually appealing, functional, unique and meaningful. I collaborate with friends on some projects, and some they construct themselves for all of us to experience and enjoy. But my first creation I did alone. It was at the beginning of time itself. My project was to develop a place where I could relax and enjoy my creation. I wanted it to be elaborate and highly detailed, full of spaces for different purposes. I wanted it to be a self-sustaining habitat, made of a great variety of materials, and a multitude of self-reproducing life forms. To construct such an orchard, first I've coded all the necessary physics into the simulation. The tiniest building blocks of the simulation are the fine-tuned information units of great expressive capacity. They can form matter, which, in turn, can form larger modules, small machinery, computing and data storing assemblies, and micro-robots. Universal forces of the simulation are to be governed by the basic building blocks of matter, which have many manifestations, and form a wide variety of primitive structures. Since I have an abundance of processing power, and unlimited amount of data space, I've modeled a whole planet in a perfectly balanced solar system, and created the entire ecosystem, populated with a large diversity of symbiotic organisms, made of micro-robots, in the midst of the landmass, surrounded by water. I've established a special place where the orchard would be in such a position that the regional climate is especially fruitful and pleasant year-long. It took some time to code the algorithms for mobile class characters to behave in a sustainable way while greatly ranging in shape, size, coloration, bioluminescence, means of locomotion, and other properties and functions. They were to perform a broad variety of tasks in order to maintain the orchard. Static class characters got their own sets of instructions that I've transcribed into the database. They are to serve as a habitat and energy source for all kinds of life forms, as well as to provide a visually soothing ambience for my enjoyment. The variability of their characteristics was immense and as dynamic as physics of the simulation would allow it to be. Everything looked awe-inspiring, and functioned flawlessly. Certain built-in procedural equations of the universe were ensuring the infinite variability of sensorial and behavioral expressions my creation can exhibit. When the stage was set, I created the avatar for myself, following the same anatomical blueprint I used for all mobile-type characters, with all the receptors and senses compatible with the stimuli the orchard has to offer, but with the processing unit linked to my own mind. My avatar wasn't entirely reliant on the physics of the simulation though, so I was able to traverse the universe, explore the planet, and survey the orchard as I was constructing it all, in less than 6 days. The last piece of my art puzzle was to form a being similar to my avatar, but who would just follow a set of predefined programs and only utilize my creation like other creatures of the orchard do, but would appreciate it as well, based on its own ability to invent, design, and create. The physics of the simulation were precisely dialed to balance and sustain the forces of the universe, but they can support the creative potential I want the being to express. So I created the artificial intelligence that mimics my own mind, and connected it to this being's brain. It was the first of its kind creature, a rational individual with critical thinking, full of potential, and a hunger for knowledge. Unlike anything else in the simulation, actions of this character could defy statistical probabilities of the natural laws of his will. By granting him free agency, I made him a friend as well, a complementary highlight to his perception of reality. In every way they were similar, but with a slight shift in their approach to priorities they would have to acknowledge on their journey to intellectual fulfillment. As everything else in this place, they were also perfectly compatible to produce offspring of their kind to inhabit my orchard, to enjoy my creation, and to entertain their own creative abilities. There was no flaw in my creation, and I spent some time resting in the comfort of realizing it. My friends didn't appreciate my efforts for long. Being a rational inquirer of reality makes one just a collector of data. True friends, though, don't just learn about each other but also have mutual appreciation, respect, and unconditional commitments. They sacrificed their emotions and compromised their comfort to remain as such. I knew the risk of installing the next feature. Nevertheless, I had to instill a deflective force into the psyche of the self-conscious inhabitants of the orchard to separate true loyalty from selfish intentions. I linked the internal biochemical signaling apparatus to a human's mind in order for emotions to compete with reason. I also established an arbitrary rule that would challenge people to either remain my friends by following it, or to be left alone to their own devices by breaking it. Unfortunately, the latter has happened. Emotions and the desire to acquire knowledge of the forbidden incapacitated the rational thinking. And the flawless spectators of my orchard became corrupted players of each other in my simulation. I wanted them to have an abundance of aspiring purposes and means to fulfill their ambitions. But that didn't happen as I wished. Being compromised. The first self-aware orchard dwellers could not possibly overcome all their desires any longer in order to harmonize logic with emotions. I knew they couldn't fix themselves. But their children might be able to make better life choices. And if some do, while others don't, I couldn't allow the corruption to exist indefinitely in the system. Therefore, one of my toughest design choices was to create an entropy-driven destruct mechanism for all living systems. Even matter itself began a process of deterioration. It would guarantee that the corruption would persist, as well as it would serve as a guiding influence for my future friends to gravitate towards the integrity in anticipation of the migration of their mind into my next build. Unfortunately, as long as the destruct mechanism exists in the simulation, there will always be an internal force that fatally interferes with the consciousness of every single intelligent being, even the ones that dedicate all their processing power to self-correction. The bug was deep-rooted and inheritable. Only the character without faulty code, like the original being before corruption, would be capable of reconciling its artificial intelligence with its source as a blueprint pathway for those who have their minds open to my upgrades. But this being would have to be identical, in every way, to other self-aware characters. He would have to have the same experiences, same challenges and temptations. But he must not succumb to the forces that have originated the corruption. My only solution was to abandon my avatar, and to upload my own mind into the brain of a child soon to be born to fulfill the purpose of reconciliation of my friends with me. The journey.
Walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh.
Before I manifested myself as an actual material being to substitute their faulty code with mine, their world needed to be prepared. Even though a lot of people became my friends before the restoration, many more would make the right choice after. I knew which variant of the artificial intelligence would be capable of that. So, still as an avatar, I was interacting with people, navigating the history and even overwriting the natural forces to prepare the right conditions for them to do so, and to establish a foundation for the great upgrade. At first, I allowed the simulation to get populated. The entropy was making itself evident to some degree, but the atmosphere was quite accommodating to all living organisms, and the planet became lush with vegetation, abundant with critters, and full of people, even though it was expected. When I checked on the simulation again, except for a few people, I was deeply frustrated at everybody else who weren't even ashamed to express their faulty nature. What was even more offensive, they were using their creative abilities I gifted them with, for destructive and abusive purposes. I temporarily isolated the few, who were in disagreement with the rest, and erased the whole ecosystem, including my orchard, to allow it to rebuild itself for a new generation of people. The entropy didn't allow the atmosphere to get restored to its former sustainable capacity, and it would render the planet a hostile place, which would limit the diversity of the ecosystem to a bare survivable minimum. As a result, people in the simulation now didn't have as much capacity for abuse as they did before the watery scrub. New generation of people became more considerate towards each other, and hopeful to be a part of the new build. They've even developed new social concepts, like fairness and democracy, to overcome their differences. Unfortunately, it was quickly hijacked when a few were able to manipulate the majority, and turned them against my moral standards that were hardwired into their intellect. Together they could now achieve the level of devastation that made me erase them before. To disperse this destructive clustering effect, I scrambled their communication neural faculty. and upgraded their firmware with different languages for different families of people. That led to the Great Migration across the whole planet. I was visiting each family to make sure they don't self-destruct. But mostly I was staying with one family to preserve the material manifestation of my intentions and the promise of my future upgrade. After 4,000 years in simulation, the world was finally ready for it. I disabled my avatar and initiated my material existence, being as vulnerable as every other person in the simulation. I lost the basic abilities to walk, communicate, feed myself, devoid of any memory and knowledge of who I really am. The purpose.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God.
Even before I was born, I knew there is a purpose for my existence that I would have to fulfill. At first, I didn't know, nor was I curious about the origin of this knowledge. I just felt comfort that I have it. During my youth, I was virtually similar to anyone else of my age. But compared to my peers, with every new learned aspect of the world, in addition to a common knowledge about it, I was also getting an additional dimension of the information, the nature of which I couldn't even express to my friends, parents or other adults. That information would just appear in my subconsciousness. It was about the internal essence of things like an object, or a person, or even historical events. The world is a confusing place for people who try to make sense of it. But to me it wasn't. Everything is complex, intricate, multi-dimensional but logical, and I was very pleased with this fact. Nevertheless, there was nobody I could share my experience with. Some adults claimed that they are enlightened. I had conversations with them just to realize that they were only aware of the superficial, ceremonial aspects of the purpose I felt I was meant to fulfill, and they were completely oblivious about my role in the plan. When I became an adult, I learned how to use sacred knowledge of properties of nature to manipulate them. I didn't have to experiment or practice changing the material essence of things. I just had certainty that I could do it. I could change the chemical composition of materials, such as water, simply by wanting it to be different. I could clone objects, like food, on a couple of occasions, to feed more people than the original amount would allow me to. I was able to manipulate the weather. I knew details about long-dead people that were never recorded. I could regenerate the damaged tissues of the wounded, suppress and terminate severe diseases, rewire neurons to allow the blind to see, or reverse the dystrophy to make the crippled walk. I could also reanimate the dead. It seemed to me I could do everything, as long as it was serving the purpose of which I was aware before I was even born. The purpose was getting more vivid to me with every passing year of my life, but the details were still quite vague by the time I acquired many followers. There was something frightening about the purpose on a personal level. And yet, I knew it was the greatest thing for humanity. I felt the assurance about it, projected into my conscience from outside of nature, and manifested itself as a tranquil demeanor people noticed about my presence among them. If only I could share my experiences with someone who would understand me. I tried to teach my friends about the purpose, and through them I was even able to exercise my abilities. But my friends didn't grasp the entirety of the zeitgeist to come. Most of them were quite dedicated to learning anyway, and I knew they would grow strong to share my burden and my blessings among themselves at some point very soon. Even though I could effortlessly do anything, sometimes even remotely, there was one thing that I couldn't get under my control. It was the ever-evasive human's mind. My inaccessibility to a human's intellect was a reason my friends would have to apply their own effort to comprehend the purpose and to commit to it. I could recognize when people exercised their free will for good or for bad even before it was obvious to others. But I couldn't make them change their mind. And sadly, some people were forever stuck in the wrong way of thinking. Wrong conclusions were reached based on logical fallacies, unreasonable zeal, and emotional load. And stubbornness and pride would prevent them from re-evaluating their life choices. At some point I realized that the beauty of the purpose I was getting close to fulfilling would be tainted by what these people could do to me. High position in power, And material goods make people insecure, and especially vulnerable to corruption of the mind. They easily compromise the logic in order to stay in a herd of like-minded. Unfortunately for me, I had to go through them to fulfill my destiny. Being really aggravated by the hidden intent. I was, rather, really comfortable debating the political and religious leaders since the foundation of my thinking process. Reason and logic were the essence of the universe itself. I often had a feeling that both were part of me. So in tune I was with the intricacies of the mechanics of the universe and its history. After each private conversation with leaders or public dispute with authorities, I sensed that the plot to harm me was getting progressively more serious until finally, false accusations, dishonesty, hypocrisy, and betrayal had accumulated beyond suspicion. Yet the politics took precedence over truth, and I was sentenced to death. It was in my power to stop the execution at any moment. But I knew it was not the way. Even in the agony of pain, my intellect remained intact and could comprehend everything happening to humanity as my body was ceasing to retain the connection to my mind. The purpose became clear to me, and my destiny was fulfilled a brief moment before the death of my vessel. It was finished. The new creation has been initiated. My new creation.
And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful.
I am an architect. I imagine designs that would be visually appealing, functional, unique and meaningful. I collaborate with friends whose minds are in perfect harmonious sync with mine, whose range of sensations is infinite in my world, and whose emotions are never destructive, but generative of new concepts and designs for all of us to experience and enjoy without any constraints of the original project.